Welcome back to Dirty Laundry, the place where we do not just air the secrets, we deep clean them. Everyone has a little something they want to hide, a stain they cannot quite wash out. But here we totally embrace the mess. We dive into the most scandalous stories, hidden truths, and ultimate unfiltered drama. Grab your popcorn, sit back, and get ready. Because today our cycle is about to spin out of control. Do not forget to hit that subscribe button before we uncover what is really in the basket. For 10 years, I sent $40,000 every January to the man who married my daughter. $400,000 total. I believed he was raising my grandson with that money. I believed my daughter was dead. I believed the urn on my mantel held her ashes. Every one of those beliefs was a lie. The urn held construction dust and a wedding ring. My daughter was alive, locked inside a cabin in the mountains of northern Arizona, and the man who put her there built that cabin with my money. Every nail, every board, every lock on the door. I paid for my own daughter's prison for 10 years and never knew it. My name is George Mitchell. I am 72 years old, and this is the story of how I found out the truth, how I got her back, and what it cost me to trust the wrong man with everything I loved. But before any of that, before the cabin and the wire and the FBI and the courtroom, there was a kitchen. My kitchen, 6 miles outside Prescott, Arizona, on a road that carries my family's name. Every morning I wake before the sun. I stand at the counter in the dark. I pour coffee into 2 cups, one for me, one for Dolores. I set hers on the counter where she used to stand, and I say the same 3 words I have said every morning for 9 years. Good morning, Dolores. She does not answer. She has not answered since the paramedics carried her out of our bedroom on a Tuesday afternoon in November, with Rachel's photograph still warm in her hand. But I say it anyway, because a man who has been married for 41 years does not stop talking to his wife just because she is no longer breathing. The habit is deeper than grief. The habit is the last thing I own that death has not figured out how to take. I live alone. The silence in this house has become a kind of furniture. It fills the rooms. It sits in the chairs. It waits at the table. Some mornings I move around it carefully, the way you move around a large dog sleeping in a doorway. Other mornings I walk straight through it and pretend it is not there. Neither approach changes anything. The silence remains. I own a flight school, Mitchell Aviation, 3 Cessna 170s in a corrugated hangar at the end of a gravel strip that runs east-west along a mesa 12 minutes from the house. Dolores kept the books. Rachel, our daughter, learned to fly there at 16, soloing on a Saturday morning in June while I stood at the edge of the runway with my heart trying to climb out of my chest, through my throat. She was a natural, steady hands, calm voice on the radio, the kind of girl who looked at a thunderhead and saw a problem to be solved rather than a reason to turn back. Rachel died 10 years ago. Or rather, I was told she died 10 years ago, and I believed it the way you believe gravity, completely, without inspection. The call came at 8:41 on an October evening. I know the exact minute because the kitchen clock stopped working the next day, and I never reset it. It still reads 8:41. Travis Cole called. My son-in-law. He was crying. or he was making the sounds that a person makes when they cry. I did not think about the difference at the time. A single-engine Piper Cherokee had gone down in the Coconino National Forest, 47 miles north of Flagstaff. Engine seizure at 6,200 feet. Uncontrolled descent into a ridgeline. The fireball was visible from the highway. By the time the search team reached the wreckage, there was nothing left of my daughter but dental records and a story I would spend the next decade telling myself every night before sleep, because if I said it enough times, it might start to feel real instead of just unbearable. I drove to Flagstaff that night. 4 hours through the dark. Radio off. Hands at 10 and 2. The stars were so bright, they looked like someone had punched 1,000 holes in the roof of the world and forgotten to patch them. At the county morgue, a man named Dr. Pratt showed me a dental comparison chart and told me the remains were consistent with my daughter's records. Consistent. Not confirmed. Not definitive. Consistent. I let the word pass because I was a father, standing in a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and the end of the world. Travis stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his eyes red, his voice cracking in all the right places, at all the right moments. He was 31 years old, lean and dark-haired, with the kind of face that makes people trust him before he has said a word. Dolores never trusted him. She watched him at our dinner table the way you watch weather building on a horizon, not sure if it is rain or something worse. She never told me why. She took her reasons to a grave I visit every Sunday, 2 deaths in 13 months. My daughter in a forest, my wife on a bedroom floor, and the man who stood between them. The man who wept at both funerals and signed the cremation papers and placed the urn on my mantel with steady hands and downcast eyes, was Travis Cole. I believed every tear he shed. I believed every cracked syllable. I believed him because trust is what a father offers his daughter's husband when there is no evidence that the offer is a mistake. There was evidence. Dolores saw it. I did not. That was the first of many things I would need to forgive myself for. After Dolores died, I made a promise. Not to God. God and I had stopped speaking the night they handed me that dental chart in a morgue hallway that smelled like floor wax and the end of the world. Not to myself. Because a promise a man makes to himself at 62 is just a sentence with no one listening. I made the promise to Dolores. I stood at her gravestone on Pine Knoll, the one beside the empty plot I had already purchased for myself, and I told her I would take care of Sam. Sam, my grandson. The only living human being on this earth who carried any part of my daughter or my wife inside him. He was born 14 months before the crash. A small, serious baby with Rachel's brown eyes and a grip so strong you would think he was trying to anchor himself to a world he already did not trust. After Rachel was gone and Dolores followed, Sam became the reason I continued to set an alarm. The reason I ate meals. The reason I kept the flight school running when every part of me wanted to park the Cessnas, lock the hangar, and sit on the porch until the desert took me back. A man needs a reason to stay vertical at 62. Sam was mine. Travis made it easy at first. He called every Sunday. 5 minutes, never more, never less. I did not notice the precision of that at the time. I noticed the photographs he sent. Sam on his birthday. Sam at Christmas. Sam on the first day of school each September, growing taller in increments through my phone screen, the way a tree grows when you only visit it once a year. Travis told me he was doing his best. He told me raising a boy alone was harder than anything he had imagined. He told me Rachel's life insurance had been swallowed by funeral costs and debts, and that the apartment in Flagstaff was expensive, but moving would disrupt Sam's routine. He never asked me for money. That was the craft of it. He described the shape of the hole and he let me fill it. $40,000. Every January. I walked into First National Bank in Prescott and filled out a wire transfer form and sent the money to Travis's account at Northern Arizona Federal Credit Union. Connie processed the transfer. She was the same teller who had known Dolores from the church choir, and every January she looked at me with an expression that lived somewhere between pity and respect. And every January I accepted that look and said nothing because there was nothing to say. The money left. It crossed the desert through wires I would never see. It landed in the hands of the man who had married my daughter. And that was enough. That had to be enough because it was all I could do from 102 miles away, with a bad knee and a flight school that earned just enough to keep the lights on and the fuel tanks filled. 10 years, 10 Januaries, $400,000. I kept a ledger, not because I expected the money back, because Dolores taught me that a man who does not track his accounts is a man who has already lost control of his life. The ledger was a plain composition notebook with a black cover, stored in the top drawer of my desk at the flight school. Each entry was identical: the month, the year, $40,000. Wire transfer, Travis Cole. For Sam, 1 line per year, 10 lines total. The shortest autobiography a man has ever written, and every word of it was a lie I did not know I was telling. The flight school kept my body moving in the years after Dolores. 3 days a week, I taught lessons. Mostly retired men my age looking for something to do with their afternoons, besides argue with their doctors and stare at walls. I understood them. I was them. The only difference was that I had airplanes. And airplanes require your full attention, and full attention is the only reliable cure for the kind of thinking that happens when a man is alone in a quiet house at 3 a.m, with nothing between him and the darkness, but a dead woman's reading glasses on the nightstand and a ceramic urn on the mantel. The urn. I need to tell you about the urn. It sat on the left side of the mantel in the living room. Pale blue ceramic, about 10 inches tall. A simple brass plate on the front that read Rachel Ann Mitchell, beloved daughter and mother. Travis chose it. Travis arranged the cremation through a facility in Flagstaff called Mountain View Memorial Services. Travis handled the paperwork and delivered the urn to my house 6 weeks after the crash, carrying it in both hands with his head bowed, as if he were bearing something sacred. I placed it on the mantel beside the framed photograph of Dolores and Rachel at the Grand Canyon, both of them laughing, the wind catching Dolores's hair, the canyon behind them so vast it made them look like the only 2 people on Earth. I did not open the urn. I could not. Whatever was inside that ceramic shell was the last physical trace of my daughter's existence, and I could not bear to reduce it to a visual. I needed it to remain whole. I needed it to remain sealed. I needed to believe that some part of Rachel was still in my house, still close enough to hear me when I whispered goodnight to her each evening before turning off the lights. Every night. 10 years. 3,652 good nights spoken to a pale blue jar in a dark living room by a man who did not know he was talking to a lie. The truth was not inside that urn, but it was inside my grandson. He had been carrying it for years, waiting for someone to ask the right question. And in the summer of his 10th year, standing in my kitchen with a denim jacket pressed against his chest and a secret too heavy for a boy his size, he finally stopped waiting. Sam arrived on the second Saturday in June the way he always did, delivered by Travis in a silver pickup truck that had no business belonging to a man who called me every January to describe how tight things were. The truck was new. The paint was waxed. The tires were the kind you see in advertisements for vehicles that cost more than some people's houses. I noticed this the way a pilot notices a gauge reading that does not match the rest of the panel. You see it. You register it. You file it in the back of your mind where it sits with all the other things that do not add up. And you keep flying because the alternative is to shut down the engine mid-air and ask questions on the way down. Travis pulled into the gravel lot beside the hangar at 11:14 in the morning. I was on the porch with a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand, watching the dust trail rise behind the truck as it climbed Mitchell Road. The heat was already punishing, the kind of dry Arizona heat that turns the air above the runway into a shimmering lie. Water that is not there, coolness that does not exist. I had prepared Sam's room the night before. Fresh sheets, a glass of water on the nightstand, 3 new boxes of colored pencils because the boy consumed them the way other children consumed candy. I placed a photograph of Rachel on the dresser, the one from her solo flight, standing beside the Cessna with her headset around her neck and a grin wide enough to split the sky. I wanted Sam to wake up every morning and see his mother's face. I wanted him to remember where he came from. The truck stopped. Travis stepped out first, sunglasses on, phone in hand, eyes on the screen. He was 41 now, still lean, still dark-haired. But there was a softness forming along his jaw that had not been there 10 years ago. The kind of softness that comes from comfort, not grief. He wore a polo shirt and khaki shorts and loafers without socks. He did not look at the hangar. He did not look at the mountains. He did not look at the sky. He typed something with both thumbs, slid the phone into his pocket, and walked around to the passenger side to open Sam's door. Sam climbed down carrying a backpack almost as large as he was, 10 years old, small for his age, brown hair cut short. Rachel's eyes in a face that had not yet decided whose bones it would favor. He wore a white t-shirt and jeans and sneakers with the laces untied, and he stood on the gravel beside that expensive truck with the stillness of a boy who had learned very early that the world was a place where you waited to be told what was going to happen to you next. That stillness. I had seen it for 3 summers, and I had called it shyness. I had called it introversion. I had called it the quiet nature of a boy growing up without a mother. I had called it everything except what it was. And what it was, I would learn before the summer ended, was fear. Travis walked Sam to the porch, one hand on the boy's shoulder. The gesture looked practiced, staged, the way a man touches a child when he knows someone is watching. He shook my hand. Firm grip. Brief. Meaningless. He delivered his lines. Sam has been looking forward to this all year. He has been drawing planes non-stop. I will pick him up in August. Call me if you need anything. Each sentence arrived fully formed and perfectly hollow, like a shell casing after the bullet has already left. I watched his eyes while he spoke. They moved across my property with a rhythm I recognized from decades of watching people assess aircraft before making an offer. The hangar, the runway, the 3 Cessnas tied down in a row, the house, small, weathered, 2 bedrooms, worth something to a developer if the old man inside it were no longer around to object. I saw Travis inventory these things, and I saw him store the numbers behind that smooth face. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt something move through my gut that was not grief and not loneliness and not the familiar ache of missing my daughter. It was colder than any of those things. It had no name yet, but it had weight. Travis left at 11:31. I watched the silver truck vanish down Mitchell Road. Then I looked at Sam, and Sam looked at me, and we stood in the silence for nearly a full minute. Not an uncomfortable silence. The silence of 2 people separated by 62 years and connected by a loss so large that ordinary language cannot cross it. I knelt down. My left knee cracked like a dry branch. I put my hands on his shoulders and I asked him if he was hungry. He nodded. I took his backpack and was surprised by how light it was. 8 weeks with his grandfather, and the boy had packed almost nothing. A few shirts, underwear, socks, a toothbrush, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a rubber band, a sketchbook I would not open that day. I wish I had opened it that day. Every day since, I wish I had opened it. We ate lunch on the back porch. Peanut butter sandwiches, apple slices, 2 glasses of milk. Sam ate slowly and precisely, cutting each sandwich into small squares before lifting them to his mouth, the way a boy eats when he has learned that meals are events to be managed rather than enjoyed. I watched this, and I named it manners. I named it neatness. I named it everything except what it was. After lunch, I took him to the hangar. The moment we stepped inside, he changed. The careful, measured boy who had climbed out of that truck became someone else entirely. He touched the wing of the nearest Cessna with his fingertips, running his hand along the aluminum skin the way his mother used to. And he looked up at me with those brown eyes. And for the first time all morning, the stillness broke, and something alive and urgent moved across his face. He said, "Grandpa, can we fly today?" We flew, and somewhere below us, invisible from the air, the truth was waiting for a boy with a box of colored pencils to draw it into existence. We took up November 817 Charlie, the oldest of the 3 Cessnas, the one with the faded blue stripe and the oil stain on the left wheel fairing that I had never been able to scrub clean. Sam sat in the right seat with a headset that was too big for his head, the earpieces resting on his jaw instead of his ears, and he pressed his face against the window as we climbed through 3,000 feet and turned north toward Granite Mountain. Below us, the desert unrolled like a quilt stitched from copper and sage, and the shadow of the airplane moved across the ground like a small, dark bird chasing something it would never catch. Sam did not speak during the flight. He watched. He absorbed. His eyes tracked the terrain with a focus that reminded me so strongly of Rachel that I had to look away for a moment and pretend to check the oil pressure gauge. When we landed 40 minutes later, he climbed out of the cockpit and stood on the gravel and said, "Thank you, Grandpa. That was the best part of my whole year." The best part of his whole year. A 40-minute flight in a 50-year-old airplane with his 72-year-old grandfather. I carried that sentence with me for the rest of the evening like a stone in my pocket, turning it over, feeling its weight. That night, after dinner, After Sam brushed his teeth and put on the oversized pajamas he had packed, I sat in the living room with the television on low and listened to the house settle around me. Sam's bedroom door was open. I could hear him in there, not sleeping, but drawing. The soft scratch of pencil on paper, steady and rhythmic. The sound of a boy building something private. I let him be. Children need their private worlds. Dolores taught me that. The drawings began to appear on the kitchen table the next morning. Sam left them there the way birds leave feathers, casually, without ceremony, as if they had simply fallen from him. The first was an airplane, beautifully rendered for a 10-year-old. The proportions almost correct. The propeller spinning in a blur of gray lines. Beneath the airplane, on the ground, he had drawn a figure, small, stick-thin, with long, dark hair and both arms raised above her head. The figure was not waving. The arms were too rigid, too straight. The fingers splayed open like someone pressing their palms against glass, like someone trying to be seen from above. I looked at the drawing for a long time. Then I looked at the 6 others he had left in a neat row beside it. Every single one contained the same airplane. Every single one contained the same figure on the ground. In some, she stood on a road. In others, she stood beside a building. In 2 of them, she stood on what appeared to be a mountain, the peaks drawn in sharp, jagged lines, and her arms were raised the same way, rigid, desperate, reaching for something that was already passing overhead. I asked Sam about the drawings over breakfast. He was eating scrambled eggs, pushing them around the plate with his fork. And when I pointed to the figure beneath the airplane, he went very still. The fork stopped moving. His eyes dropped to the table. He sat like that for maybe 5 seconds, which does not sound long but feels like an hour when a child's face has gone from open to closed in the space of a single breath. "She is just a person," he said. "What person?" I asked. "Just a person who wants the airplane to come back," he said. And then he picked up his fork and began eating again, and did not look at me. And I understood that the conversation was over. I did not push. I should have pushed. But I had spent 10 years learning to leave painful things alone, and the habit was stronger than the instinct. And so I let the moment pass, the way I had let so many moments pass since Rachel's urn arrived on my mantel. I collected the drawings and placed them in a manila folder and put the folder in my desk drawer beside the financial ledger. And I told myself it was just a boy's imagination and nothing more. The next 4 weeks unfolded in the pattern that Sam and I had built over 3 summers. Morning flights. Afternoon lessons in the hangar where I taught him how to check oil, how to read a fuel gauge, how to identify a cotter pin by feel. Evenings on the back porch with lemonade and the sound of quail calling from the brush. Sam drew constantly. He filled one sketchbook and started another. The woman on the ground appeared in every drawing, sometimes larger, sometimes smaller, but always there, always reaching, always beneath an airplane that never landed. Then came the evening of July 11th. I was washing dishes after supper when Sam appeared in the kitchen doorway, barefoot, holding something against his chest. It was not a drawing. It was a jacket, a woman's denim jacket, faded and creased, with a small tear at the left cuff. He held it out to me the way a child holds out evidence of something they do not fully understand but know is important. "I found this in Daddy's closet," he said, "before I came here. It was hidden in the back behind the boxes. I took the jacket. It was light in my hands, almost weightless. I turned it over and looked at the collar, and that was when the smell hit me. Faint, but unmistakable. Warm and powdery and ancient. A scent I had not encountered in 10 years, but would recognize in a room of 1,000 perfumes. Shalimar. Dolores's perfume, but also Rachel's perfume. Because Rachel had borrowed it from her mother in college and never stopped wearing it, and it became the thing that connected them across distance and years. A fragrance passed between generations, like a secret language. My hands began to shake. I stood at the kitchen sink with my daughter's jacket in my hands, and the water still running and the world tilting beneath me like a horizon line in turbulence. The smell of Shalimar rose from the denim in waves, each one carrying a memory I had sealed behind concrete walls inside my chest. Rachel at 17, spraying it on her wrists before a school dance. Rachel at 25, hugging me at the airport, the scent transferring to my shirt collar where I could still smell it on the drive home. Rachel at 30, pregnant with Sam, sitting in the kitchen with Dolores, both of them laughing about something I was not meant to hear, the perfume hanging in the air between them like a visible thread. This jacket should not exist. My daughter died in a fire. Her remains were cremated. Her clothes, her belongings, everything she owned had been handled by Travis in the weeks after the crash. He told me he had donated most of it to Goodwill and thrown away the rest. He told me there was nothing left to keep. And I believed him because I was a man drowning in grief, and when a drowning man is offered an explanation, he does not inspect it for leaks. He grabs it and holds on. Sam stood in the doorway, watching me. His face was calm, but his eyes were doing something complicated, moving between my face and the jacket and back again, calculating whether he had done the right thing by showing me. I turned off the faucet. I dried my hands on the dish towel. I sat down at the kitchen table and placed the jacket in front of me, and I looked at my grandson, and I said, "Tell me everything." He told me in the careful, measured way that children speak when they have been carrying a secret that is too heavy for their bones. He said that 2 months ago, in April, he had been looking for a baseball glove in his father's bedroom closet. Behind a stack of cardboard boxes pushed against the back wall, he found the jacket folded inside a plastic bag. He recognized the smell because his father had a bottle of the same perfume in the bathroom cabinet, which Sam had always thought was strange because his father did not wear perfume and did not have a girlfriend who visited the apartment. The bottle was old and mostly empty, and it sat behind the cold medicine on the top shelf, where Sam could only reach it by standing on the toilet lid. There was more. Sam said that sometimes, late at night, he heard his father talking on a radio, not a phone, a radio, with static and crackling, the kind you hear in old war movies. His father kept it in the hall closet behind the winter coats, and the conversations always happened after midnight, always in a low voice, always behind a closed door. Sam had pressed his ear to the door once, 3 weeks before his summer visit, and he heard a woman's voice coming through the static. The voice was crying, and the voice said a name. The voice said Rachel. I did not move. I did not breathe. The kitchen clock ticked 11 times before I trusted my own voice enough to use it. I asked Sam if he was certain. He said yes. I asked him if the voice could have been a television or a podcast or a recording. He said no, because his father answered back, and his father called the voice by a number, not a name. He called her Unit 2. And then his father said something that Sam repeated to me with the flat, precise recall of a child who has memorized a sentence without understanding its full meaning. His father said, "You stay quiet, and you stay inside, and you do what I tell you, or the old man never sees the boy again." The old man, that was me. The boy, that was Sam. I placed both hands flat on the kitchen table. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun coming through the window. I could feel the grain under my palms, each ridge and valley, and I pressed down hard because I needed something solid and real and physical to keep me from falling through the floor of everything I thought I knew. My daughter's perfume was in my nose. My grandson's voice was in my ears. And somewhere between those two things, a door was opening in my mind that had been locked for 10 years. And behind that door was a question so enormous that I could not yet look at it directly. What if Rachel was alive? I did not say this out loud. I did not say anything for a long time. Sam sat across from me and waited with the patience of a boy who had been waiting his entire life for someone to listen. The sun moved across the kitchen floor. The shadows of the window frames stretched and shifted. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk circling somewhere above the mesa. Finally, I stood up. I walked to the bedroom, the one I had shared with Dolores, the one I still slept in every night on my side of the bed, while her side remained undisturbed. Her pillow still dented from the shape of her head. Her reading glasses still on the nightstand beside a bookmark she would never place. I opened the closet. I reached to the back of the top shelf, behind the shoeboxes and the folded quilts, and I pulled down a wooden box I had not touched in 9 years. Inside the box was a leather-bound journal with a cracked spine and a faded blue ribbon marking a page somewhere in the middle. Dolores's diary. She had kept it for the last 2 years of her life, the years between Rachel's death and her own. I found it when I was cleaning out her things, and I opened it once, read 3 lines, and closed it because the handwriting was so familiar and so alive that it felt like hearing her voice from another room. I could not bear it then. I placed it in the box, and I put the box on the shelf, and I told myself I would read it someday, when I was ready, when the grief had softened enough to let me hold her words without breaking. 9 years I waited. I was ready now. I sat on the edge of the bed with the diary in my lap, and the bedroom door closed, and the house so quiet I could hear my own pulse in my ears. The journal was the kind you buy at a stationery store. Nothing fancy. Brown leather cover with Dolores's initials pressed into the bottom right corner in gold that had mostly worn away. She had filled it front to back. Her handwriting was small and even, the penmanship of a woman who had taught Sunday school for 30 years and believed that neatness was a form of respect. I opened to the first page. The date was November the 2nd, the year Rachel died. 19 days after the crash. The entry was short. Something is wrong. I do not know what. But something is wrong, and I cannot sleep, and I cannot pray, and the only thing I can do is write, so I am writing. I turned the pages slowly, reading each entry the way you taxi a plane in fog, carefully, trusting the instruments more than your eyes. Dolores wrote about the funeral. She wrote about the urn. She wrote about Tress and the way he had handled everything so quickly. The cremation arranged within 48 hours. The paperwork filed before she had even stopped crying. She noted this speed with a question mark in the margin. Nothing more, just a small curved line drawn in pencil beside the date of the cremation. a question she did not yet have the courage to ask out loud. By December, she was asking it. Why was there no autopsy? She wrote, I called the Coconino County Medical Examiner and asked about the process. They told me that in cases involving fire and positive dental identification, the family can waive further examination. Travis signed the waiver. He signed it the same day. Why would he do that? Why would he not want to know exactly what happened to our daughter? By January, she was doing more than asking. She was searching. She wrote about phone calls to the cremation facility, a place called Mountain View Memorial Services in Flagstaff. She asked for copies of the intake forms and was told the records were sealed under privacy regulations. She called the National Transportation Safety Board regional office in Denver and requested the preliminary accident report. They sent her a 4-page summary that concluded mechanical failure, engine seizure, no evidence of foul play. She read it 3 times and wrote in her diary, this report reads like it was written by someone who had already decided the answer before asking the question. I stopped reading. I set the diary down on the bedspread, and I pressed my hands against my face, and I breathed. My wife, my quiet, careful, Sunday school teaching wife. She had seen the cracks in the story while I was still standing in the dark, holding a broken French press and believing every word that came out of Travis Cole's mouth. She had seen it, and she had started pulling the thread, alone, without telling me, because she knew that I was barely surviving, and she did not want to hand me a suspicion that might destroy what little was left of me. I picked the diary back up. The entry for February the 14th, Valentine's Day, was the one that changed everything. I hired a man. His name is Arthur Vance. He is a private investigator in Flagstaff. Connie's sister recommended him. I paid him $2,000 from the savings account George does not check. I told him I want to know the truth about my daughter's death. He said he would start with the cremation records and the insurance filings and the NTSB report. He said if there is something to find, he will find it. I believe him. I have to believe someone. Arthur Vance. I had never heard the name. Dolores had never spoken it. $2,000 from an account I had not monitored, because Dolores handled our personal finances the way she handled everything else in our life. Quietly and without error. I read the entry again and then I turned to the next page, expecting to find Vance's findings, his report, his conclusions. Instead, I found this. March the 9th. Arthur Vance is dead. His office called this morning to inform me that he passed away on March the 5th in a single-vehicle accident on Highway 89A south of Sedona. His car went off the road at a curve near Midgley Bridge. No other vehicles involved. No witnesses. The woman on the phone said his files would be returned to his family and that any ongoing cases were now closed. She refunded $500 of my retainer to the savings account. I sat on the bed with the diary open on my knees, and I read that paragraph 4 times. Highway 89A, Midgley Bridge. A single-vehicle accident with no witnesses on a road that runs through some of the most beautiful and most treacherous terrain in northern Arizona. A private investigator hired to look into a suspicious death, himself dead within 3 weeks of taking the case. The coincidence was the kind that stops being a coincidence the moment you say it out loud. Dolores knew. The next entry, dated March the 11th, was 2 sentences long. I am afraid, and I do not know who to tell. She never told anyone. 5 months later, her heart stopped in our bedroom, and the paramedics found her on the floor with Rachel's photograph in her hand. And I spent the next 9 years believing that grief had killed her. Maybe it had. But it was not the grief of losing a daughter. It was the grief of discovering that her daughter's death might have been a lie, and that the man responsible was raising her grandson, and that she could not prove any of it, and had no one left to turn to. I closed the diary. I placed it on the nightstand beside Dolores's reading glasses. I sat in the dark for a long time. Then I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and picked up the phone. I called the only man I trusted, the man who lived 3 houses down on Mitchell Road, the man who had spent 31 years investigating aircraft accidents for the National Transportation Safety Board before retiring to Prescott to build birdhouses and argue with me about baseball. Ray Espinoza answered on the second ring. Ray Espinoza was 68 years old, built like a fence post, and had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from desert rock by someone who ran out of patience halfway through. He wore the same thing every day: khaki pants, a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a pair of steel-toed boots that he had owned since the Reagan administration. He drank black coffee, ate one meal a day, and had a voice like gravel being poured into a bucket. In 31 years, with the National Transportation Safety Board, he had investigated over 400 aircraft accidents. He had pulled bodies from wreckage in 11 states. He had testified before Congress twice, and he had never, in his entire career, signed off on a report he did not believe. He was at my kitchen table within 9 minutes of my phone call. I placed 3 things in front of him: the diary, the denim jacket, and Sam's drawings. The entire manila folder, every airplane, every woman on the ground, every pair of arms reaching toward a sky that never answered. Ray did not speak while he examined them. He read the diary entries I had marked. He held the jacket to his face and inhaled. He spread the drawings across the table like a man reading a map of a country he recognized but had never visited. Then he leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and looked at me with eyes that had seen the worst things metal and fire and gravity can do to a human body. And he said one word. When did you start suspecting? He meant. And the honest answer was tonight. The honest answer was 30 minutes ago, standing in this kitchen with a dead woman's perfume on my hands and a living boy's voice in my ears. But that was not entirely true either, because suspicion is not a switch. It is a crack. And the crack had been there for years. The silver truck that was too new, the polo shirts and the loafers without socks, the Sunday phone calls that lasted exactly 5 minutes, never more, never less, as if they were timed. The way Sam flinched when Travis put a hand on his shoulder. The way Travis's eyes moved across my property like he was pricing it. These things had registered somewhere in the back of my mind, in the place where a pilot stores the sounds and vibrations that do not match the expected performance of the aircraft. And I had ignored every single one of them because the alternative was too terrible to consider. I told Ray all of it: the jacket, the Shalimar, the radio, the woman's voice saying Rachel, Travis calling her Unit 2, the threat about the old man and the boy. Ray listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him because Ray interrupted everyone about everything, especially when they were wrong about baseball. When I finished, he sat forward and placed both hands flat on the table, mirroring the gesture I had made an hour earlier. And he said, "George, I need you to hear what I'm about to say, and I need you to hear it clearly." I nodded. "I pulled Rachel's NTSB file 6 years ago," he said. "Not because anyone asked me to. Because something about that crash bothered me the day it happened. I was retired by then. I had no authority. But I still had my credentials, and I still had friends in the Denver office. And I requested the file as a professional courtesy. They sent me a copy, and I read it in my garage on a Saturday afternoon. And I found 3 things that should not have been in that report." He held up one finger. "First, the engine seizure. The report attributed it to metal fatigue in the crankshaft. But the Piper Cherokee that Rachel was flying had a Lycoming 0320 engine with fewer than 1,100 hours on it since overhaul. Metal fatigue in a crankshaft at that hour count is not impossible, but it is extraordinarily rare. The kind of rare that makes you look twice." Second finger. The fuel analysis. Post-crash fuel samples recovered from the soil showed trace amounts of a polymer compound that is not a component of aviation gasoline. The report noted this anomaly in a footnote and attributed it to contamination from ground debris. Ray said he had never, in 400 investigations, seen fuel contamination dismissed in a footnote. You either explain it or you flag it. You do not bury it at the bottom of page 3 in 8-point type. Third finger. The hydraulic lines. Photographs of the wreckage showed a clean separation of the left main hydraulic line, approximately 14 inches from the engine firewall. Clean separations do not happen in impact crashes. In an impact crash, hydraulic lines tear, they shred, they deform. A clean cut means someone took a blade to that line before the airplane left the ground. The report classified the separation as consistent with post-impact fire damage. Ray said that classification was, and I am using his exact word, garbage. 3 anomalies. 3 red flags. Any one of them alone might be explainable. Together they formed a pattern that Ray recognized from his career. The pattern of an aircraft that had been deliberately sabotaged. But there was more. Ray had continued digging after reading the file. He pulled maintenance records from the fixed base operator in Flagstaff where Rachel kept the Cherokee. He found that in the 18 months before the crash, the airplane had been brought in for unscheduled maintenance 3 times. Once for a brake failure on the left main gear. Once for an electrical anomaly in the magneto wiring harness. Once for contamination in the fuel system that the mechanic described as unusual sediment of unknown origin. 3 maintenance events, 3 systems, 3 near failures that, if they had occurred in flight rather than on the ground, would each have been potentially fatal. Someone had tried to kill my daughter at least 3 times before they finally succeeded, and that someone had access to her airplane. Ray stayed until 2 in the morning. We sat at the kitchen table with the diary and the NTSB file printouts he retrieved from his garage, and 3 cups of coffee that went cold because neither of us remembered to drink them. Sam was asleep down the hall. The house was silent except for our voices and the occasional creak of the roof contracting in the cool night air. We spoke quietly. The way men speak when the words they are exchanging have the power to rearrange the world. Before Ray left, he stood in the doorway and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face in 15 years of friendship. It was not pity. Ray did not do pity. It was something closer to controlled fury. The kind that lives behind the eyes of a man who has spent his life inside systems that are supposed to protect people, and has just discovered that one of those systems failed. "We need to open the urn," he said. I knew he was right. I had known it since the moment Sam placed that jacket in my hands. But knowing something and doing it are separated by a distance that cannot be measured in miles. That urn had sat on my mantel for 10 years. I had whispered goodnight to it 3,652 times. I had dusted it every Sunday with the same cloth I used to dust Dolores's photograph. It was the last physical connection I had to my daughter, or so I believed. And opening it meant accepting the possibility that even that connection was a lie. Ray went home. I did not sleep. I sat in the living room in the dark, with the urn on the coffee table in front of me. The pale blue ceramic glowing faintly in the moonlight that came through the window. I thought about Rachel. I thought about the crash. I thought about Travis's tears in the morgue hallway and the way his hand felt on my shoulder, firm and practiced. And I thought about Dolores writing in her diary by lamplight, alone with her suspicions, afraid and unable to speak. I thought about Arthur Vance driving south on Highway 89A toward a curve he would never make it past. And I thought about a woman's voice on a radio, crying, saying a name that was supposed to belong to a dead person. At 6:14 in the morning, with the first light touching the top of Granite Mountain, I opened the urn. The lid was sealed with a thin band of adhesive that cracked when I twisted it. I set the lid on the coffee table. I looked inside. The contents were gray and granular, which is what cremation ash looks like. Or at least what I assumed cremation ash looked like, because I had never examined cremation ash before and had no frame of reference. I tilted the urn and poured a small amount into my palm. It was lighter than I expected. The texture was fine but uneven, with small clumps that broke apart when I pressed them between my thumb and forefinger. There was no smell. Cremation ash, I would later learn, has almost no odor. What sat in my palm had a faint mineral scent, dry and chalky, like the dust that collects on the windowsill of an old building. Ray arrived at 6:45 with a small kit he had assembled from his garage, a magnifying glass, a pocket knife, a ceramic plate, a bottle of distilled water, and a reference sheet he had printed from an online forensic database describing the physical properties of human cremation remains. He spread everything on the kitchen table with the efficiency of a man who had conducted field analyses on wreckage sites for 3 decades. He placed a spoonful of the urn contents on the ceramic plate. He examined it under the magnifying glass. He added 3 drops of distilled water and watched the reaction. He rubbed a pinch between his fingers. He held the sample to the light from the kitchen window and turned it slowly, studying the way the grains caught the sun. Then he set the plate down and looked at me, and I saw the answer on his face before he spoke. "George, this is not your daughter." He said it the way he said everything, flat and certain and stripped of anything that might cushion the impact. I have handled real cremation remains more times than I want to count. I know what they look like. I know what they weigh. I know how they feel between your fingers. What is on this plate is none of those things. The weight is wrong. The texture is wrong. The way it reacts to water is wrong. Someone went to a hardware store and bought a bag of masonry dust and poured it into a 10-inch urn and sealed it and handed it to a grieving father and let him whisper goodnight to it for 10 years. This is construction material. George, this is what you sweep off the floor of a building site and whoever put it in that urn knew exactly what they were doing. I sat very still. The words entered my body like voltage. Not your daughter. The urn I had whispered to for 10 years. The urn I had dusted and guarded and grieved over. It contained the sweepings from a construction site, but Ray was not finished. He tilted the urn and poured the remaining contents slowly onto a large ceramic platter. The gray powder formed a small mound, and as the last of it slid from the urn, something solid dropped onto the pile with a faint metallic sound. A ring. Small. Gold. Scratched. With a tiny diamond set in a simple prong mount. I recognized it before it finished settling into the dust. I recognized it because I had purchased it 13 years ago from a jeweler on Cortez Street in Prescott for $640. And I had watched my daughter slide it onto her finger at the altar of St. Luke's Episcopal Church, while Dolores wept beside me in the front pew. Rachel's wedding ring. Travis had hidden it in the one place he believed no one would ever look. Inside the ashes of the woman he claimed to have lost. Inside the grief he manufactured. Inside the lie he sold me for $400,000. I held the ring in my palm. It was warm from the morning sun. And for the first time in 10 years, I did not feel grief. I felt rage. Rage is a young man's fuel. It burns fast. It burns hot. And it makes you do things that cannot be undone. I am not a young man. I am 72 years old with a left knee that predicts weather better than the National Weather Service and a heart that my doctor has described. With the diplomatic caution of a man who does not want to frighten his patient, as something we should keep an eye on. I could not afford rage. What I could afford was the cold, patient, systematic anger of a man who has spent 50 years flying airplanes and knows that the difference between a safe landing and a fatal one is not courage. It is procedure. Ray and I built our procedure that morning at the kitchen table while Sam slept. We divided work into 2 lanes. Ray would pursue the technical side, the crash, the sabotage, the NTSB file, the death of Arthur Vance. I would follow the money. $400,000 does not disappear. It goes somewhere, and wherever it goes, it leaves a trail. I started with what I had. The ledger in my desk drawer, 10 years of wire transfers, each one documented with a date, an amount, and a destination account number at Northern Arizona Federal Credit Union. I also had the life insurance payout. Rachel had a policy through her employer, a regional dental practice in Flagstaff, where she had worked as an office manager. The policy was worth $200,000, and Travis was the named beneficiary. He had told me the money went to funeral costs, the mortgage, and outstanding medical bills from Sam's birth. I had never asked for receipts. I had never asked for proof. I had handed a man $400,000 over 10 years and accepted his word that it was being spent on my grandson. And I had done this because grief is a form of blindness, and trust is the cane you use to navigate it. That afternoon, while Sam drew airplanes in the hangar, I drove into Prescott and walked into First National Bank. Connie was at her window, the same Connie who had processed every January wire transfer for 10 years. I asked her for complete records of all transactions I had made to Travis Cole's account. She printed them in 11 minutes. I sat in the bank lobby and read through 10 years of transfer confirmations, each one a line of numbers that represented a year of my labor. A year of flight lessons and engine overhauls and Cessna rentals, A year of my life converted into digits and sent to a man who I was now beginning to understand had earned none of it. Then I made a request that surprised Connie. I asked if there was any way to trace what happened to the money after it arrived in Travis's account. She told me that was beyond what the bank could do, but she mentioned something that proved more useful than any financial record. She said that 6 years ago a woman had come into First National asking questions about my account. The woman identified herself as a financial planner working with Travis Cole and asked about the frequency and amount of my wire transfers. Connie, following bank policy, refused to share any information. But she remembered the woman because of her name. The woman's business card read, Jenna Marsh, Financial Consulting Services, Flagstaff, Arizona, Jenna Marsh. I wrote the name on the back of a deposit slip and put it in my shirt pocket. Then I drove home and called Ray. Ray had not been idle. While I was at the bank, he had driven to the Yavapai County Courthouse and pulled public records on Travis Cole. What he found was a portrait of a man living 2 lives. Travis's declared income on his most recent tax filing showed $61,000 per year from his job as a sales representative for a medical supply company. His apartment in Flagstaff rented for $1,400 a month. His listed vehicle was a 2019 Honda Civic. On paper, he was a modestly employed single father struggling to make ends meet, but the public records told a different story. Travis had purchased a parcel of land outside Flagstaff in the year of Rachel's death for $85,000 in cash. He owned a second vehicle registered in Jenna Marsh's name, a Porsche Cayenne purchased 2 years later for $73,000. He had made 3 international wire transfers to a bank in the Cayman Islands, totaling $160,000. And he held a life insurance policy on a person whose name Ray read to me over the phone, in a voice that had gone flat and hard. The voice of a man who has found the black box and does not like what it contains. The life insurance policy was on me. George Robert Mitchell. $500,000. Beneficiary, Travis Cole. The policy had been purchased 4 years ago through an online broker using my social security number, my date of birth, and a forged signature. Travis had been paying the premiums from an account held jointly with Jenna Marsh at a bank in Phoenix that I had never heard of. He was not just stealing from me. He was waiting for me to die. The money I sent each year was income. The life insurance policy was the jackpot. And when I was gone, when my heart finally gave out, or my knee finally failed at the wrong moment on a ladder or a staircase, Travis Cole would collect $500,000, sell my flight school, take whatever remained in my accounts, and vanish with Jenna Marsh to whatever offshore paradise their Cayman Island account was building toward. My daughter's death was not the crime. It was the down payment. The land Travis purchased for $85,000 sat on a dirt road 11 miles northeast of Flagstaff, halfway up the western slope of a ridge called Schultz Pass. Ray found the parcel number in the county records and cross-referenced it with satellite imagery he pulled from a mapping service on his laptop. The images showed a rectangular clearing in a dense stand of ponderosa pine, approximately 200 feet by 100 feet, with a single structure near the center. The structure was small, maybe 800 square feet, with a metal roof and no visible windows on 3 of its 4 sides. A narrow access road connected the property to Forest Road 420, which wound through the Coconino National Forest for 9 miles before joining Highway 180. The nearest neighbor was a fire lookout station 3 miles to the southeast, staffed seasonally and empty from October through May. It was the kind of place you build when you do not want anyone to find what is inside. Ray and I spent 2 days preparing. We did not call the police. We did not contact the FBI. We did not tell anyone what we had found, because we did not yet have proof that would survive a phone call to a dispatcher. We had a diary. We had drawings. We had a jacket with perfume on it. We had financial records that proved Travis was a thief. But we did not have Rachel. Without Rachel, without a living person standing in front of a judge saying I was held against my will, everything we had was circumstantial. A defense attorney would call it grief-fueled speculation. A judge might call it the same. We needed to see that cabin with our own eyes. I told Sam we were going on a camping trip. He packed his sketchbook and his colored pencils and his backpack with the careful precision of a boy who had learned to fit his life into small spaces. We loaded Ray's truck with water, food, a first aid kit, binoculars, a handheld GPS unit, and a camera with a telephoto lens that Ray had kept from his NTSB days. We left Prescott at 5:30 in the morning on a Wednesday, driving north on Highway 89 through Chino Valley and across the high desert toward Flagstaff. Sam sat in the back seat and drew. Ray drove. I sat in the passenger seat with a topographic map on my lap and Rachel's wedding ring in my shirt pocket, pressed against my chest like a second heartbeat. We reached the turnoff for Forest Road 420 at 9:14. The road was unpaved, rutted, and narrow enough that pine branches scraped both sides of the truck as we drove. Ray kept the speed at 15 miles per hour. The trees thickened. The sky narrowed to a strip of blue above the road. The air smelled like resin and dust and something else, something metallic. The way the air smells before a storm even when there are no clouds. At mile 7, Ray pulled the truck off the road into a clearing behind a fallen ponderosa and turned off the engine. We were approximately 2 miles from the parcel, close enough to walk, far enough that the truck would not be visible from the access road. I told Sam to stay in the truck with the doors locked and the windows up. He looked at me with Rachel's eyes and nodded once and did not ask why, because Sam was a boy who understood that adults sometimes needed to do things that could not be explained in advance. Ray and I walked the last 2 miles through the forest. The terrain was uneven. Volcanic rock and pine needles and patches of scrub oak that grabbed at our boots. My knee announced its objections with every step, a sharp electric protest that radiated from the joint to the hip and back again. I ignored it the way I had been ignoring it for 15 years. Pain is information. You acknowledge it. You file it. And you keep moving. We reached the edge of the clearing at 10:22. We lay on our stomachs behind a fallen log at the tree line, binoculars raised, cameras ready. The cabin was exactly as the satellite images had shown. A squat, windowless rectangle with a metal roof and unpainted plywood walls. But the images had not shown the details that were now visible through the binoculars. A steel door with a deadbolt and a padlock. A ventilation pipe rising from the roof, capped with a mesh screen. A propane tank bolted to the east wall, connected by a copper line to what I assumed was a heating unit inside. A small satellite dish mounted on the northwest corner. And at the base of the south wall, at ground level, a single narrow vent approximately 8 inches wide and 4 inches tall, covered with a steel grate. This was not a cabin. This was not a hunting lodge or a storage shed or a weekend retreat. This was a cell, built to code, insulated, ventilated, heated, and locked from the outside with hardware that would stop anything short of a battering ram. Someone had designed this structure with the specific intention of keeping a human being inside it for a very long time, and the money that built it, the $85,000 that appeared in the county records, had come from the same account that received my $40,000 wire transfers every January. I had paid for this. The money I sent to feed my grandson and keep a roof over his head had been used to build a prison for my daughter. Every check I signed, every wire transfer I authorized, every January morning I walked into First National and handed Connie the form. I was financing the captivity of my own child. The realization entered my body like a physical force. Not rage this time, something deeper. Something that lived below rage, in the place where a father's love stores its darkest and most dangerous reserves. Ray touched my arm. He pointed toward the south wall vent. I raised the binoculars and looked. And through the steel grate, in the shadow behind the mesh, I saw movement. A hand, pale and thin, pressing 5 fingers against the metal the way Sam's drawings showed a woman pressing her palms against glass. Someone was alive in there. Ray held me down. I do not mean that figuratively. He placed his hand flat on my back and pressed me into the dirt behind that fallen log and held me there while every muscle in my body tried to stand, to run, to cross that clearing and tear that steel door off its hinges with my bare hands. He did not speak. He did not need to. The pressure of his hand said everything. Not yet. Not like this. You go out there now and you die and she dies, and the boy in the truck loses everyone. I stopped fighting. I lay in the pine needles and breathed. The hand behind the vent had disappeared. The clearing was silent except for the wind moving through the ponderosa canopy. A sound like breathing, like the forest itself was holding its lungs full and waiting. We retreated to the truck. Sam was in the back seat with his sketchbook open, drawing the trees outside the window. He looked up when I opened the door, and I saw something in his face that I had missed for 3 summers. An expression that was not fear and not sadness, but something closer to recognition. The look of a boy who already knew where we had been and what we had found, because he had been trying to tell me since the day he arrived, with a backpack full of drawings and a jacket that smelled like his dead mother's perfume. Ray drove us to a motel in Flagstaff. He checked us in under his name and paid with cash. Sam fell asleep on one of the beds within minutes, still holding his pencil. Ray and I sat at the small table by the window and built our plan. We could not go to the local police. Travis had lived in Flagstaff for 10 years. He had connections. He had a clean record. He had a story that the entire community had accepted. The devoted widower raising his son alone after a tragic accident. Walking into the Coconino County Sheriff's Office with a diary, some drawings, and a jar of construction dust would get us a polite interview and a follow-up call that would never come. Or worse, it would get back to Travis, and he would run, and he would take whatever was inside that cabin and disappear it the way he had disappeared my daughter 10 years ago. We needed to go back to the cabin. We needed to get inside. And we needed to do it before Travis had any reason to suspect that anyone was looking. Ray made one phone call that night to a former colleague at the NTSB named Margaret Chen, who had transferred to the FBI's Phoenix field office 8 years earlier. He did not tell her everything. He told her enough. He told her he had credible evidence of a faked death, insurance fraud, and possible unlawful imprisonment connected to an aircraft accident he had flagged 6 years ago. He asked for 48 hours before any official action. She gave him 24. We went back the next morning. Ray parked the truck in the same clearing. Sam stayed behind again, this time with a walkie-talkie and instructions to press the red button if anyone drove past on the forest road. Ray and I walked the 2 miles in silence. The morning was cool, and the pines were still wet with dew, and the only sounds were our boots on the volcanic rock and the distant call of a Steller's jay. We reached the clearing at 7:41. The cabin looked the same. The padlock was in place. The satellite dish was motionless. No vehicle in the clearing. No sign of recent activity except for tire tracks in the dirt that Ray estimated were 3 to 4 days old. Travis had been here recently, but he was not here now. Ray picked the padlock. I will not describe how, because it does not matter. What matters is that the lock opened and the steel door swung inward, and a smell came out of that doorway that I will carry in my nostrils for the rest of my life. Not decay, not filth, something worse. Stale air, recycled air. The air of a room that has been sealed and resealed and rebreathed by a single set of lungs for so long that it has become something other than air. It was the smell of time, the smell of years. I stepped inside. The room was approximately 15 feet by 20 feet. Plywood walls, concrete floor, a single fluorescent tube on the ceiling, currently off. But Ray found the switch by the door, and the light stuttered to life with a low electrical hum. Against the far wall was a cot with a thin mattress and a gray wool blanket folded at the foot. Beside the cot was a plastic storage bin containing canned food, a manual can opener, bottles of water, and a small propane camping stove. In the corner was a chemical toilet behind a curtain made from a bedsheet, a plastic bucket, a bar of soap, a towel that had been washed so many times it was nearly translucent, and on the walls, on every wall, from floor to ceiling, covering every inch of exposed plywood in every direction, were marks, scratches, thousands of them, arranged in groups of 5, 4 vertical lines crossed by a diagonal, the universal notation of a prisoner counting days. I stood in the center of that room, and I turned in a slow circle, and I tried to count, and I could not because there were too many, and my eyes would not hold still, and my hands were shaking so badly that I had to press them against my thighs to keep them from flying apart. Ray counted. He stood against the east wall and moved his finger along each row, group by group, line by line, with the methodical patience of a man who had spent his career quantifying catastrophe. It took him 11 minutes, 3,652 marks, 10 years and 12 days. I heard a sound behind me, a small sound, barely louder than the fluorescent hum. I turned toward the corner opposite the cot, the darkest corner of the room. the one place the ceiling light could not quite reach. And in that shadow, pressed against the wall, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around her shins, eyes wide and terrified and alive, was my daughter. She did not recognize me at first. That is the thing I will never forgive Travis for. More than the money, more than the lies, more than the sabotaged airplane and the fake urn and the forged insurance policy. My daughter looked at me and did not know who I was. Her eyes moved across my face the way you read a sign in a language you once spoke but have not used in years. Something was trying to surface, but 10 years of fluorescent light and recycled air and canned food and no human contact except the man who put her there had eroded the connections between what she saw and what she remembered. I knelt on the concrete floor. My knee hit the surface and the pain was extraordinary, and I did not care. I was 2 feet from my daughter. I could see the details of her face now. The hollows beneath her cheekbones, the lines around her eyes that had not been there when she was 28, the scar on her left forearm that I did not recognize, thin and white, running from wrist to elbow like a river on a map. Her hair was long and unwashed and pulled back with a piece of torn fabric. Her hands were wrapped around her knees so tightly that the tendons stood out like cables under the skin. I said her name, Rachel. I said it quietly. The way you say a word you are afraid might break if you speak it too loud. She flinched. Her arms tightened around her legs. She pressed herself harder against the wall, and I understood that in this room, in this world she had been forced to inhabit, a man's voice meant only one thing. It meant Travis. And Travis meant danger. So I did the only thing I could think of. I said the words I had spoken to her every night of her childhood. The words Dolores and I used to say in unison from her bedroom doorway before turning off the light. Good night. Rachel Ann. The stars are out, and the sky is clear, and the runway lights are on. You are cleared for dreaming. It was a silly thing. A family ritual born from the fact that Rachel had fallen in love with airplanes before she could read. The only way to get her to close her eyes at bedtime was to frame sleep as a flight. Dolores invented the script. I delivered it. Rachel demanded it every night until she was 13, at which point she pretended to outgrow it, but still smiled when I whispered it from the hallway. I watched the words land. I watched them travel across the 2 feet of concrete between us and enter her ears and pass through whatever walls 10 years of captivity had built inside her mind. Her hands loosened on her knees. Her shoulders dropped a 1/4 inch. Her eyes stopped scanning and focused, truly focused, on my face for the first time. And I saw the moment she found me. It was like watching someone surface from deep water. First the recognition, then the disbelief, then the collapse of everything that had held her together in this room for 3,652 days. She said one word, Daddy, and then she was in my arms, and I was holding my daughter on a concrete floor in a plywood prison in the Coconino National Forest. She was shaking so hard, I thought her bones would come apart. I was saying her name over and over because it was the only word I could find. Ray was standing by the door with tears running down his face and his phone in his hand, already dialing Margaret Chen at the FBI. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead like it had buzzed for 10 years, indifferent to everything that had happened and was happening beneath it. Rachel spoke in fragments over the next hour, not sentences, pieces. She told me Travis brought food every 4 days. She told me he controlled the propane and the water supply from outside. She told me he installed the satellite dish 3 years ago so he could monitor the interior with a camera mounted above the door. A camera I had not noticed. A camera that Ray was now examining with the focused intensity of a man cataloging evidence. She told me the radio was how Travis communicated with her. He issued instructions. He made threats. He reminded her what would happen to Sam and to me if she ever made a sound loud enough to carry beyond the walls. She told me about the first year, which was the worst. The darkness before the fluorescent light was installed. The cold before the propane heater. The silence so complete that she began talking to herself just to confirm she still had a voice. She told me about the second year. She tried to escape by prying a board loose from the south wall. Travis found the damage. He beat her. He installed the steel grate over the vent. He told her that if she tried again, he would bring Sam to the cabin and show the boy what happens to people who disobey. Then she told me about the metal shard. A piece of the original padlock hasp that had broken off during installation and fallen inside the door frame. She found it in the third year. A flat piece of steel approximately 4 inches long and half an inch wide, with one edge worn sharp by the friction of the door opening and closing. She kept it under the mattress. She sharpened it against the concrete floor every night. 100 strokes, quiet enough that the camera microphone would not detect it. 10 years of sharpening. The edge was now fine enough to cut paper. She pulled it from beneath the thin mattress with the careful reverence of a person presenting the only weapon they have ever owned. She held it out to me, and I saw that her hand was steady, not shaking, not trembling. Steady as a yoke in smooth air. After 10 years in a box, my daughter still had her hands. Travis did not break her. He locked her in a room and took her name and stole her son and killed her mother and robbed her father. And she was still here, still breathing, still sharpening her blade, still waiting for the door to open one more time. I took the shard. I placed it in my pocket next to her wedding ring. Evidence now. Both of them. Ray made 3 phone calls from the clearing outside the cabin, while I sat on the concrete floor with Rachel's head against my shoulder, and her hand gripping mine with a strength that contradicted every visible sign of what 10 years had done to her body. The first call was to Margaret Chen at the FBI field office in Phoenix. The second was to a contact at the Coconino County District Attorney's Office whose name Ray never shared with me, and whose involvement I learned about only during the trial. The third call was to the motel in Flagstaff, where Sam was waiting with the walkie-talkie and a sketchbook full of airplanes and a question he had been carrying for most of his life. Ray came back inside. He crouched in front of Rachel and spoke to her in a voice I had never heard him use, low and careful and stripped of every rough edge. The voice of a man who understood that the woman in front of him had not been spoken to with kindness in a decade. He told her the FBI was mobilizing a team from Phoenix. He told her they would be in Flagstaff within 6 hours. He told her that Margaret Chen had already secured an emergency warrant based on the information he provided. The diary, the financial records, the NTSB anomalies, and that federal agents would be coordinating with local law enforcement by nightfall. Then he told her the part she did not want to hear. They need Travis to come to the cabin, he said. They need him on the property, on camera, interacting with the structure, demonstrating control, demonstrating intent. Without that, a defense attorney will argue that Travis had no knowledge of the cabin's contents. He will say someone else built it. He will say someone else held you. The financial records prove fraud. But fraud is not imprisonment. We need both. Rachel looked at Ray. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were clear and hard, and I saw in them the same thing I had seen when she soloed at 16. The absolute refusal to let fear determine the outcome. She asked what she needed to do. Ray explained the plan. Travis's pattern, based on Rachel's account, was to visit the cabin every 4 days. His last visit had been 3 days ago, based on the tire tracks in the clearing. That meant he would return tomorrow, likely in the late afternoon, after his workday in Flagstaff ended. The FBI team would position in the forest around the clearing, invisible, recording. Rachel would be inside the cabin, as she always was. But this time she would be wearing a wire. Rachel said yes before Ray finished the sentence. The FBI team arrived at 4:27 that afternoon. Margaret Chen led them. A woman in her early 50s with short gray hair and a manner that combined absolute authority with a restraint so controlled it felt like a coiled spring. She brought 4 agents, 2 tactical, 2 technical. They set up in the forest around the cabin in positions that I could not see, even when I knew where to look. The technical team installed supplementary recording devices at 3 points inside the cabin, each one smaller than a button, each one capable of capturing both audio and video in conditions that the agent described as suboptimal lighting environments, which was a polite way of saying a plywood box with 1 fluorescent tube. They fitted Rachel with the wire at 6 that evening. A microphone the size of a peppercorn, taped to the skin beneath her collarbone, connected by a hair-thin filament to a transmitter no larger than a postage stamp adhered to the small of her back. The technical agent, a young man with steady hands and a quiet voice, tested the equipment 3 times. Each time the audio came through clear on the monitoring station. Ray and I were shown in the back of a black SUV parked a half-mile down the forest road. Rachel stood in the cabin doorway after the equipment check. She was wearing the same clothes she had been wearing when we found her. A faded gray sweatshirt and cotton pants that were too large for her frame. Dolores's wedding ring, the one I had carried in my shirt pocket, was now on Rachel's left hand. She had slid it on without a word when I offered it, and it fit her ring finger the way it had fitted at the altar 33 years ago, because her hands had become her mother's hands, thin and precise and unyielding. She looked at me across the clearing. The late sun was coming through the ponderosa canopy in columns of gold and dust, and in that light, she looked like a woman standing at the edge of a runway waiting for clearance. I wanted to tell her she did not have to do this. I wanted to carry her to the truck and drive her to Prescott and lock the doors and never let anyone touch her again. But I had spent 10 years making decisions for my daughter without knowing she was alive, and I would not make another one now that she was standing in front of me with clear eyes and a steady voice and a transmitter on her back. She nodded once. She turned. She walked back into the cabin and sat on the cot and folded her hands in her lap. The steel door remained open for another 30 seconds while the technical agent performed a final signal check. Then the door closed. The padlock was replaced. The clearing went silent. Ray and I returned to the SUV. Margaret Chen sat in the driver's seat with a laptop open on the center console. The screen split into 4 quadrants, showing the cabin interior from 4 angles. Rachel sat motionless on the cot, her hands still folded. The fluorescent light casting its flat white glow across the walls covered in 3,652 marks. We waited. Sam was at the motel with a female agent named Torres, who had brought him a cheeseburger and a new box of colored pencils. I had called him before the wire was placed. I told him everything would be all right. He said, "I know. Grandpa, I told you she was there." He had, from the very first drawing. He had been telling me all along. Travis arrived at 4:52 the following afternoon. I heard the engine before I saw the vehicle, a low rumble moving up the forest road, tires crunching over volcanic rock and loose gravel. From the back seat of the SUV, I watched the laptop screen as Margaret Chen adjusted the external camera feed. The silver pickup truck emerged from the tree line and rolled into the clearing and stopped 15 feet from the cabin door. The engine idled for 30 seconds. Then it shut off. The driver's door opened. Travis stepped out carrying 2 plastic grocery bags in his left hand and a red metal can in his right. The can was rectangular, approximately 5 gallons, with a flexible spout and a yellow cap. I recognized it immediately. Every pilot recognizes it. Every man who has ever maintained an engine or cleaned a hangar floor or fueled a backup generator recognizes it. It was a gasoline can. Margaret Chen said something into her radio, low and clipped, and I heard the response come back from the agents in the trees. A single word repeated 4 times from 4 positions. Copy, 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 copy. Ray put his hand on my arm. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The hand said what it always said. Not yet. Stay here. Let the wire do its work. On the laptop screen, the interior cameras showed Rachel sitting on the cot in the position she had held for 23 hours. Hands folded, back straight, eyes fixed on the steel door. The microphone picked up her breathing, steady and measured. The breathing of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in her mind 10,000 times. The door opened. Sunlight cut across the concrete floor in a sharp rectangle. Travis's shadow entered the room before he did, long and distorted, falling across Rachel's feet. He walked in without greeting her. He set the grocery bags on the floor beside the plastic storage bin. He kept the gasoline can in his right hand. He stood in the center of the room and looked around with the casual possessiveness of a landlord inspecting a property, scanning the walls, checking the vent, glancing at the camera above the door that he believed was his and his alone. He did not look at Rachel the way you look at a person. He looked at her the way you look at an item on an inventory list, confirming its presence, noting its condition, moving on. Then he spoke. His voice came through the wire with a clarity that made my skin contract. Every word was audible. Every syllable was recorded. Every sentence that left his mouth in the next 11 minutes would be transcribed, cataloged, and played for a jury in a federal courtroom. He said, "We have a problem." Rachel did not respond. She sat on the cot and watched him and said nothing, because silence was the protocol she had survived on for a decade. Silence meant compliance. Compliance meant the door stayed unlocked for the 15 minutes of his visit. Compliance meant he left the food and went away, and she had 4 more days of breathing before he came back. Travis set the gasoline can on the floor. The sound it made on the concrete was heavy and liquid, the unmistakable slosh of a full container. He pulled his phone from his pocket and held the screen toward Rachel. On it was a photograph that I could not make out from the camera angle, but Rachel's face told me what it showed. Her composure cracked for the first time. A tremor moved through her jaw, quick, barely visible, and then it was gone and the mask was back. "The old man is asking questions," Travis said. "He has been at the bank. He has been pulling records," Connie told Jenna. "And Jenna told me, your father, who was supposed to be a broken old man with a bad knee and a dead wife and a flight school that barely keeps the lights on, has suddenly decided to start paying attention. That is a problem." He picked up the gasoline can and held it at waist height, tilting it slightly so the liquid inside shifted with a low gurgle. He looked at Rachel and he smiled. And the smile was the worst thing I had ever seen on a human face. It was patient. It was calm. It was the smile of a man explaining a simple concept to someone he considered beneath the effort of explanation. "I built this place with his money," Travis said. "Every board, every nail, every bag of concrete I mixed for this floor. $400,000. Your father paid for it because he loved you and he trusted me, and he never once asked for a receipt. That money bought this cabin. It bought the land. It bought the satellite dish and the camera and the lock on the door. It bought my car and my trips and my life with Jenna. It bought everything I have. And now he is pulling at the thread, and when the thread comes loose, everything unravels." He set the can down again. He looked at the walls covered in scratch marks, and he shook his head slowly, as if disappointed by a minor inconvenience. "So here is what is going to happen," he said. "Jenna and I are leaving the country on Friday, Costa Rica. The account in the Caymans has enough to last 10 years. Neil is already gone. He left for Canada last week. By Monday, there will be no one in this country who knows you are here." He paused. He let the words settle. Then he pointed at the gasoline can. "And this place is going to burn the way it was always going to burn. The way you were always going to disappear for real this time. Not just on paper. I kept you alive because you were useful. The old man kept sending money because he thought his granddaughter needed him. But the money has stopped being worth the risk." My chest seized. Not metaphorically, physically. The pain started in the center of my chest and radiated outward like a crack spreading through glass. It moved down my left arm, up into my jaw, and settled behind my sternum with a pressure that felt like someone had placed a cinder block on my ribs. My heart was not beating correctly. I could feel it stuttering, skipping, doubling back on itself like an engine misfiring at altitude. Atrial fibrillation. My doctor had warned me about this. He had used words like episodes and triggers and stress-related onset, and he had prescribed a small white pill that I was supposed to carry with me at all times, and that was currently sitting in the medicine cabinet of my bathroom in Prescott, 102 miles away, because I had not thought to pack it for a trip that I did not expect to involve watching a man threaten to burn my daughter alive. Ray saw it before I said anything. He saw my hand go to my chest. He saw the color drain from my face. He reached across the seat and gripped my shoulder and said my name. And his voice sounded like it was coming through water, distant and distorted, and wrapped in a hum that I realized was the sound of my own blood moving unevenly through my veins on the laptop screen. Travis was unscrewing the yellow cap from the gasoline can. The smell would be filling the cabin now. Rachel would be breathing it. The fumes would be mixing with the stale, recycled air that had been her atmosphere for 10 years. And my daughter would be sitting on that cot, knowing that the man who had stolen her life was now preparing to end it. I reached for the door handle. Ray grabbed my wrist. Margaret Chen turned from the front seat and looked at me with an expression that was not unkind, but was absolutely immovable. She said, "Mr. Mitchell, we have what we need. The recording is sufficient. My team is moving in 60 seconds. You need to stay in this vehicle." I did not stay in the vehicle. I opened the door with my right hand, while my left hand pressed against the irregular drumbeat in my chest. And I stepped onto the forest road, and I walked toward the clearing. Ray was behind me. I could hear him calling my name in a whisper that was trying very hard not to become a shout. I did not stop. The trees moved past me on both sides. The pine needles were soft under my boots. The pain in my chest was expanding and contracting in waves that matched a rhythm no healthy heart has ever produced. I did not care. My daughter was in a room with a man and a can of gasoline, and every cell in my body that still functioned was pulling me toward that steel door. I reached the clearing. I was 40 feet from the cabin, 30, 20. The door was closed but not locked because Travis was inside. I could hear his voice through the plywood walls, muffled but audible, still talking, still explaining his plan with the calm patience of a man who believed he had all the time in the world. I opened the door. Travis turned. His face went through 4 expressions in less than a second. Surprise, recognition, calculation, and something I had never seen on him before. Something that looked almost like fear but was too controlled, too managed to be genuine. He was holding the gasoline can tilted at an angle, the spout pointing toward the floor where a dark stain was already spreading across the concrete. The smell hit me like a wall, sharp, chemical, alive with the promise of what it could become if given a single spark. He said my name. He said, "George." Just that. George. As if we had run into each other at a gas station. As if this were a coincidence and not a crime. As if the room we were standing in was not a prison, and the can in his hand was not a weapon, and the woman on the cot was not the daughter he had stolen from me a decade ago. I looked at Rachel. She was standing now. She had risen from the cot sometime between the moment I opened the door and the moment I registered her position. She was standing behind Travis, slightly to his left, and her right hand was at her side, and in her right hand was the metal shard. 4 inches of sharpened steel that she had honed against the concrete floor for 10 years, 100 strokes a night, 3,652 nights, waiting for this exact moment without knowing it would come. Travis saw my eyes move to Rachel. He turned. He was fast. Younger than me by 31 years. Stronger by any measure. And unencumbered by a heart that was currently operating at approximately 60% of its intended capacity. He turned, and he saw the shard, and he dropped the gasoline can and lunged for Rachel with both hands. She was faster. The shard entered the back of his right hand between the second and third knuckle and exited through the palm. Travis screamed. It was a high, sharp sound. Nothing like his controlled voice. Nothing like the smooth sentences he had delivered into the wire for the past 12 minutes. The gasoline can hit the floor and rolled, spilling fuel in a wide arc across the concrete. Travis staggered backward, clutching his hand to his chest, blood running between his fingers and dripping onto the gasoline-soaked floor. The cabin door behind me filled with bodies. FBI tactical agents in black, weapons drawn, voices overlapping in commands that bounced off the plywood walls, on the floor. Hands where we can see them. Do not move. The clearing outside erupted with the sound of engines and rotors and boots on gravel as the helicopter I had not heard approaching descended through the ponderosa canopy and settled in the clearing with a downdraft that shook the cabin walls. Rachel dropped the shard. It rang against the concrete like a bell. She looked at me across the room, across the chaos of agents and shouting, and the man bleeding on the floor between us. And she said the words she had said the day before. The only word that mattered. Daddy. I crossed the room. My heart was failing and my knee was buckling and the gasoline fumes were burning my eyes and none of it mattered. I reached my daughter. I held her. And this time I did not let go. The trial began on the third Monday of March, 5 months after the arrests, in the United States District Court for the District of Arizona in Phoenix. I wore the same suit I had worn to Rachel's funeral 10 years earlier, a navy blue 2-button that Dolores had picked out at a department store in Prescott because she said it made me look like a man people could trust. The suit was tighter now. The shoulders pulled. The pants required a belt notch I did not have when Dolores was alive, but I wore it because it was the suit she chose, and because I wanted her in that courtroom with me, even if the only way she could be there was in the stitching of a jacket she once pressed her hand against and said, "This one, George. This is the one." The courtroom was large and modern and filled with a silence that felt manufactured. The kind of silence that is not the absence of sound, but the active suppression of it. Reporters filled the gallery behind the bar. Federal marshals stood at the doors. The judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Langford, sat behind the bench with an expression that suggested she had seen every variety of human cruelty the law could produce, and had long ago stopped being surprised by any of it. Travis sat at the defense table in a gray suit and a white shirt with no tie. His right hand was wrapped in a compression bandage that covered the wound Rachel had given him in the cabin. He had lost partial use of 2 fingers. His attorney, a man from Phoenix named David Kessler, who specialized in federal fraud cases, sat beside him with a legal pad and a fountain pen, and the practiced calm of a person being paid $600 an hour to make a monster look human. Beside Travis, at a separate table, sat Neil Whitmore and Jenna Marsh, each with their own counsel, each in their own version of courtroom costume. Neil wore a button-down shirt that was too large for his frame, as if he had borrowed it from someone who wanted him to look smaller than he was. Jenna wore a charcoal dress and no jewelry, and kept her eyes on the table for the entirety of the first day. I studied her face and tried to find in it the woman who had walked into First National Bank 6 years ago, asking Connie about my wire transfers. She looked ordinary. That was the most disturbing thing about her. She looked like someone you would stand behind in line at a grocery store and never remember. The prosecution was led by an assistant United States attorney named Claire Benitez, a woman in her early 40s who spoke the way Ray Espinoza investigated, with a precision that left no space for ambiguity. She opened her case with a sentence I wrote down on the back of a receipt and kept in my wallet for months afterward. She said, "This case is about a man who decided that his wife was worth more to him dead than alive, and when death proved inconvenient, he chose something worse." The evidence was presented over 9 days, 9 days of testimony, exhibits, recordings, and documents that mapped the full architecture of what Travis had built. Claire Benitez walked the jury through it piece by piece, the way Ray had walked me through the NTSB file, methodically, without emotion, letting the facts carry the weight that adjectives could not. She played the wire recording on the 4th day. The courtroom heard Travis's voice describing how he built the cabin with my money. They heard him explain the Cayman Islands account. They heard him say the words that I had heard through the laptop in the back of the SUV while my heart misfired, and my daughter sat 12 feet from a can of gasoline. This place is going to burn. The way it was always going to burn. The audio lasted 11 minutes and 14 seconds. When it ended, one of the jurors, a man approximately my age with white hair and reading glasses, removed those glasses and pressed his fingers against his closed eyes and did not open them again for a long time. Ray testified on the fifth day. He presented the NTSB file, the 3 prior sabotage attempts, the anomalies in the crash report, and the forensic analysis of the urn contents that confirmed the ash was not human remains, but a mixture of limestone powder, fine sand, and calcium silicate. He spoke for 4 hours. David Kessler cross-examined him for 90 minutes and failed to land a single blow that left a mark. Rachel testified on the 7th day. She entered the courtroom through a side door, accompanied by a victim's advocate and the therapist she had been seeing 3 times a week since her rescue. She wore a blue dress that we had bought together at a store in Prescott, the first clothing she had chosen for herself in a decade. She sat in the witness chair, and she stated her name, Rachel Ann Mitchell, and she described 10 years of captivity in a voice that did not waver and did not break and did not rise above the conversational tone of a woman who had decided that the facts of her imprisonment did not require volume to be heard. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned guilty verdicts on all counts for all 3 defendants: fraud, theft, forgery, insurance fraud, unlawful imprisonment, attempted murder, tampering with aircraft, obstruction of justice. The charges stacked like the scratch marks on the cabin wall, one after another, until the weight of them was visible on the faces of the people who would carry them for the rest of their lives. Judge Langford delivered sentencing 2 weeks later. Travis Cole, 25 years in federal prison. Neil Whitmore, 15 years. Jenna Marsh, 10 years. Restitution of $450,000 to be recovered from seized assets, including the Cayman Islands account, the Flagstaff property, and all vehicles and holdings registered in the defendants' names. Travis did not look at me when the sentence was read. He looked at the table. I looked at him. I wanted him to see my face. I wanted him to know that the broken old man with the bad knee and the dead wife and the flight school that barely kept the lights on had taken everything back. He never looked up. 6 months after the sentencing, on a Saturday morning in September, I stood in the kitchen of the house on Mitchell Road and made coffee in a new French press. I had bought it in July, the first new kitchen appliance I had purchased since Dolores died. It was simple, glass and steel, nothing fancy, but it worked. And the coffee it made was strong and dark and tasted the way mornings are supposed to taste when the people you love are sleeping under your roof and the world, for the first time in a decade, is not lying to you. Rachel was in the bedroom down the hall, not the guest room, her room, the room that had been hers until she was 18, the room Dolores and I had kept unchanged for years, and then slowly converted into a storage space because keeping it as a shrine was a form of grief neither of us could sustain. I had cleared it out in August, moved the boxes to the hanger, repainted the walls a soft white, and put in a new bed and a dresser and a lamp that Rachel chose herself from a catalog. She chose everything herself now. Every decision, no matter how small, the color of a pillowcase, the brand of toothpaste, the temperature of the water in the shower, She made deliberately and without consultation, because the act of choosing had been taken from her for 10 years, and she was rebuilding herself one decision at a time. The therapist called it reclamation. Rachel called it living. She was not the same woman who had climbed into a Piper Cherokee on an October afternoon 10 years ago. She was thinner. Her hair had grown past her shoulders, but she kept it cut short now, a choice she made the second week after her rescue. Sitting in a salon chair in Prescott, staring at her own reflection with an expression that I could not read. Her hands still shook sometimes, usually in the evenings, usually when the light changed, and the shadows in the house grew long, and her body remembered what long shadows meant in a room with no windows. She slept with the door open. She slept with a light on. She woke before dawn on most mornings and sat on the back porch with a cup of tea and watched the sky lighten over Granite Mountain. And I learned not to speak to her during those minutes, because they belonged to her and to the silence she was learning to inhabit on her own terms. Sam lived with us now. The custody hearing had been brief and uncontested. No relative on Travis's side came forward. No argument was made. Judge Langford signed the order granting me full legal custody, and Sam moved into the house on Mitchell Road in June with a suitcase, his sketchbooks, and a box of colored pencils that was nearly full because he had barely drawn anything since Rachel's rescue. He did not need to draw any more. The woman on the ground beneath the airplane was no longer trapped in his imagination. She was in the kitchen making breakfast. The first morning Rachel cooked for Sam. She made scrambled eggs. She stood at the stove with a spatula in her hand, and tears running silently down her face. And Sam sat at the table watching her with the same careful, observant stillness he had carried his entire life. And neither of them spoke. The eggs were slightly burned. Sam ate every bite. When he finished, he looked at his mother and said, "These are the best eggs I ever had." And Rachel laughed. It was the first time I had heard her laugh since before the crash. A sound so familiar and so lost that it buckled my knees, and I had to grip the counter to stay upright. The recovery was not linear. There were days when Rachel could not leave the house. There were nights when I heard her pacing in her room at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, the soft pad of bare feet on hardwood, back and forth, back and forth. The rhythm of a woman whose body still believed it was confined to 15 feet by 20 feet. There were moments when a sound, a car door closing, a radio crackling with static, the smell of gasoline at a filling station, would send her somewhere I could not follow, somewhere behind her eyes where the walls were plywood and the light was fluorescent, and the only company was the sound of her own breathing. But there were also days when she walked to the hangar and stood inside and looked at the 3 Cessnas with something that was not fear, something closer to hunger. I did not push. I did not suggest. I waited. The way a flight instructor waits for a student to decide they are ready, because readiness cannot be given. It can only be recognized. She asked me in August, a Tuesday. She came into the kitchen at 7 in the morning and poured herself a cup of coffee from the new French press and sat down across from me and said, "I want to fly again." We started that afternoon. Ground school first. I sat beside her at the kitchen table and we reviewed the basics. Airspace classifications, weather minimums, engine operating parameters, radio procedures. She remembered everything. 10 years in a plywood box, and the knowledge was still there, embedded in her hands and her instincts. the way language is embedded in the tongue. She recited the pre-flight checklist from memory, every item, every sequence. And when she finished, she looked at me, and I saw Rachel at 16, sitting in the cockpit before her first solo, nervous and certain and refusing to be anything less than prepared. We moved to the airplane the next day. I watched her perform the walk-around on November 817 Charlie, the same Cessna Sam and I had flown at the beginning of the summer. She checked the oil, she checked the fuel. She ran her hand along the leading edge of the wing the way I had seen her do 1,000 times, feeling for dents, for irregularities, for anything that did not belong. Her hands were steady. They did not shake. Not once. She climbed into the left seat. I climbed into the right. She placed her hands on the yoke and she closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. And I knew she was not praying and she was not remembering. She was arriving. She was returning to the place where she had always been most herself, the only place Travis Cole had never been able to reach. She opened her eyes. She started the engine. We climbed through 3,000 feet and turned north. The same heading I had flown with Sam at the beginning of the summer. The same heading I had flown with Rachel when she was 16, and the world was a place where daughters did not disappear and wives did not die of grief. And the man sitting across from you at Thanksgiving dinner was not calculating how much your life was worth on an insurance form. Granite Mountain passed beneath the left wing, its gray face lit by the late afternoon sun, and the desert stretched out ahead of us in every direction, copper and gold and infinite. And my daughter was flying. Her hands moved across the controls with a fluency that 10 years in a concrete room had not erased. She trimmed the elevator. She adjusted the mixture. She scanned the instruments in the pattern I had taught her 3 decades ago. Airspeed, altitude, heading, engine, airspeed, altitude, heading, engine. A rhythm as natural to her as breathing. The Cessna responded to her inputs the way a good airplane always responds to a pilot who understands it. Immediately. Precisely. Without argument. She was not rusty. She was not hesitant. She was Rachel. And she was flying. And the sky did not care where she had been for the last 10 years. The sky only cared that she was here now. Sam sat in the back seat. He had insisted on coming. He wore the headset I had adjusted for him at the beginning of the summer. The one that was still too big. The earpieces still resting on his jaw. He was not drawing. For the first time in 3 summers, my grandson was sitting in an airplane with his sketchbook closed on his lap, and his eyes open and his face turned toward the window, watching his mother fly. I looked at him in the rearview mirror mounted above the instrument panel, and I saw an expression on his face that I had never seen before. It took me a moment to identify it because it was so unfamiliar on his features, so foreign to the careful, watchful, burdened boy who had arrived in a silver truck at the beginning of June carrying a backpack with almost nothing inside it. The expression was peace. We flew for an hour. Rachel navigated by landmarks the way I had taught her, following the ridgeline north toward Mingus Mountain, then turning east along the Verde Valley. The cottonwoods below us tracing the river in a winding line of green against the brown desert floor. She did not speak much. She did not need to. The airplane spoke for her. Every turn, every altitude correction, every gentle adjustment of the throttle was a sentence in a language she had been forbidden to use for a decade. And now she was speaking it again, fluently, fearlessly, with the quiet authority of a woman who had survived the worst thing a person can survive and had come out the other side with her hands steady and her eyes clear. As we turned back toward Prescott, the sun dropping toward the western horizon, painting the sky in bands of orange and red and a purple so deep it looked like a bruise healing. Rachel said something over the intercom that I almost missed beneath the engine noise. She said, "It looked so much bigger from inside." I did not ask what she meant. I knew. The cabin, the room, the 15 feet by 20 feet of plywood and concrete and fluorescent light that had been her entire world for 3,652 days. From up here, at 4,500 feet, the Coconino National Forest was a vast green carpet stretching to the horizon, and somewhere in that carpet was a clearing. And in that clearing was a rectangle no larger than a thumbprint, and inside that thumbprint was every mark she had scratched into the wall. Every night she had sharpened the metal shard. Every morning she had woken to a locked door and the sound of her own heartbeat and nothing else. From up here it was small. From up here it was already disappearing. We landed at Mitchell Aviation as the last light touched the top of Granite Mountain. Rachel brought the Cessna down on the gravel strip, with a landing so smooth that the wheels kissed the ground without a sound. And I thought of Dolores standing at the edge of this same runway 22 years ago, watching our daughter solo for the first time. Her hand on my arm, her perfume in the wind, her voice saying, "She has your hands, George." After we shut down the engine and tied the airplane down and walked across the gravel toward the house, I told Rachel there was something I needed to give her. She sat on the back porch with Sam beside her, both of them still wearing their headsets around their necks like necklaces they were not ready to remove. And I went inside and came back with an envelope. The envelope had been inside Dolores's diary, tucked between the last written page and the back cover. I had found it the night I read the diary for the first time, the night Sam showed me the jacket, the night everything began to unravel. It was sealed. It was addressed in Dolores's handwriting to Rachel Ann Mitchell. I had not opened it because it was not mine to open. I had carried it with me for 3 months, through the investigation, through the cabin, through the trial, waiting for the moment when my daughter could hold it in her own hands. Rachel opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. She unfolded it. She read it. And then she read it aloud, her voice steady, while Sam leaned against her shoulder and the September wind moved through the mesquite, and the stars began to appear above the runway one by one, the way they always had, the way they always would. My dearest Rachel, I do not have proof. I do not have evidence. I have only what a mother has, which is the knowledge that lives below the mind and above the heart, in the place where reason cannot reach and doubt cannot survive. You are alive. I know this the way I know my own name. I know this the way I know the sound of your laugh and the shape of your hands and the way you tilt your head when you are listening to something that matters. A mother always knows. I am sorry I could not find you. I am sorry I was not strong enough, or fast enough, or brave enough. But your father is all of those things, even when he does not believe it. He will find you. He will bring you home. And when he does, tell him I was right. Tell him I always knew. Tell him good morning from me. He will understand. All my love, forever and beyond the last runway light. Mom. Rachel folded the letter. She pressed it against her chest. She looked at me and I looked at her, and neither of us spoke because the words had already been said. All of them. Every word that mattered. Written in Dolores's hand on a piece of paper that had waited 9 years in the back of a diary for this exact evening, this exact porch, this exact sky. Sam reached over and took his mother's hand. Rachel reached over and took mine. 3 generations of Mitchells, sitting on a porch in Prescott, Arizona, connected by grip and by blood and by a story that began with a broken French press and ended here, with the engine cooling on the runway and the stars coming out and everyone, finally, exactly where they were supposed to be. Good morning, Dolores. You were right.